Hey everyone, welcome back. We're building something peaceful in Minecraft today while I tell you about some of the wildest revenge stories the internet has to offer. We're kicking things off with a boss who thought blackmail was a solid career strategy. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's dive into tonight's chaos. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone who's been watching and commenting. I read all of your messages and appreciate the support so much. I'll keep doing my best to help you unwind while we dive into some wild Reddit drama. So the first story begins in a corporate office where power dynamics took a dark turn. A 26-year-old employee found herself cornered after a late meeting, facing an ultimatum no one should ever hear. But here's the thing about people who think they're untouchable. They never see the recorder running. I was 26 years old when I learned that some people mistake power for permission. It was a Thursday night, one of those late meetings that should have ended at 6 but dragged on until almost 9 because my boss, let's call him Derek, insisted on micromanaging every detail of a presentation that was already finished. Everyone else had filtered out one by one until it was just the two of us in that cold conference room with the flickering overhead light that maintenance never bothered to fix. That's when he said it, not even disguised as a suggestion or wrapped in corporate doublespeak. Just a flat statement delivered like he was discussing quarterly projections. Sleep with him or my job was gone. Simple as that. He even smiled when he said it, like he was doing me a favor by being direct. I felt my stomach drop. You know that sensation when the ground shifts and suddenly you're not standing on solid footing anymore? That's what it felt like. I managed to stammer something non-committal and got out of there as fast as I could without running. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get my key in the car door. The worst part? He had leverage, real leverage. Over the past few months, he'd been building a paper trail of fake performance reviews, documenting problems that never existed, manufacturing concerns about my productivity and attitude. I'd noticed them in my file during a routine check-in and questioned him about it, but he'd waved it off as standard documentation. Now I understood. He'd been laying groundwork, building a case to fire me if I didn't comply. The man had actually planned this. I spent that entire weekend feeling trapped, disgusted, powerless. I barely slept. I kept playing the conversation over and over in my head, wondering if I'd misunderstood, knowing I hadn't. Monday morning felt like walking into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But here's the thing about corners. Sometimes when you're backed into one, you start looking for exits nobody else noticed. I started recording everything, every conversation, every text message, every casual comment he made that carried a veiled threat. I bought a small recording device that looked like a pen and kept it in my pocket during every interaction with him. When he sent emails with suggestive undertones, I forwarded them to a personal account he didn't know existed. When he called me into his office for private meetings, I made sure my phone was recording in my bag. For 3 weeks, I played along just enough to keep him thinking I was considering it, that I was scared enough to eventually give in. And I was scared, terrified actually, but I was also furious, and that fury kept me focused. Then I started noticing things I'd been too panicked to see before. The way he interacted with other women in the office, the closed-door meetings that went on too long, the uncomfortable glances. I wasn't the first. That realization hit me like ice water. I reached out carefully, privately, to 2 women who'd left the company in the past year. One didn't want to talk, the other did. She told me everything. The same pattern, the same fake performance reviews, the same ultimatum. She'd quit rather than fight it, took a severance, signed an NDA. But she still had her documentation. She sent me copies. This is where patience finally snapped. The third woman I found was still at the company, in a different department. She'd been dealing with him for months, trapped in the same nightmare, thinking she was alone. When I showed her what I had, when she realized someone else knew and believed her, she broke down crying in the bathroom. Then she got angry. She had recordings too. Derek called me into his office on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember the date because it was exactly 3 weeks and 2 days since that first conversation. He was done waiting. He actually told me that, said he'd been patient enough, and it was time for me to show appreciation for his mentorship. Mentorship. The word made my skin crawl. I played dumb. Told him I needed one more day to think about it, that I wanted to make sure I was making the right decision. He bought it completely. Why wouldn't he? In his mind, he'd already won. That night, I sent everything, every recording, every screenshot, every piece of documentation from all three of us. I sent it to HR with a formal complaint. I sent it to the company board with a detailed timeline. And I sent it to his wife because she deserved to know exactly who she was married to. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse for him. I was wrong. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. The next morning, I arrived at work early, half expecting to be called into HR myself, maybe even escorted out. Instead, I watched through the glass walls as security met Derek in the lobby. They didn't even let him up to his office. Just turned him around and walked him back out to the parking lot while he argued and gestured wildly. People stopped and stared. Word spread through the office in minutes. HR called me in around 10. I thought I was done for. Instead, they apologized. Actually apologized. The board had reviewed everything overnight. They'd found 2 more women who'd filed complaints years ago that had been buried. Derek had been doing this for almost a decade, protected by an old boys network that was finally crumbling. Turns out his wife filed for divorce that same day. Can't say I felt bad about that. The lawsuit started rolling in within a week. The company settled with all of us, though I can't discuss the details because of the agreement. But I can say it was enough to make the whole nightmare feel slightly less nightmarish. Derek ended up facing multiple civil suits, lost his professional license in our industry, and last I heard he's working retail in another state. His LinkedIn profile is gone. His reputation is destroyed. I transferred to a different department, one I'd actually wanted to work in before all this happened. 6 months later, I got promoted. Not because of what happened, but because I'm actually good at my job. Something Derek spent months trying to make everyone doubt. Sometimes the system actually works. Not often, and not on its own. You have to force it. You have to document everything, gather evidence, find allies, and refuse to be silent even when silence feels safer. It's exhausting and terrifying, and you shouldn't have to do it. But sometimes you do. I still have all the recordings backed up in 3 different places. I probably always will. Not because I think I'll need them, but because they remind me that I'm not powerless, even when someone tries very hard to make me feel that way. The other women and I still check in sometimes. We're not close friends or anything, but there's a bond there, an understanding. We survived something we shouldn't have had to survive, and we made sure the person who caused it actually faced consequences. That doesn't happen enough, but when it does, it matters. But speaking of families falling apart when secrets surface, the next story involves a funeral that became ground zero for decades of hidden lies. My aunt's funeral was supposed to be dignified. That's what everyone kept saying in the days leading up to it. Dignified, respectful. A proper send-off for a woman who'd spent her entire life being the pillar of our family. Aunt Marie wasn't just loved, she was revered. The kind of person who organized charity drives, volunteered at soup kitchens, remembered every birthday, and somehow made everyone feel like they were her favorite. Her house was where Christmas happened. Her advice was gospel. Her reputation was spotless. The chapel was packed. I'm talking standing room only. Friends, colleagues, people from the charities she supported, distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. Everyone dressed in black, whispering about what a loss this was, how the world was worse off without her. The flower arrangements alone probably cost more than my rent. Everything was orchestrated to perfection, just like Aunt Marie would have wanted. My cousin Jake was giving the eulogy. He'd volunteered for it, which surprised some people because Jake had always been a little distant from the family. Quiet, reserved. He showed up to events but never really engaged. Still, he was her son, so it made sense that he'd want to speak. He walked up to the podium looking calm, composed even. He had notes in his hand. Everyone settled in, expecting the usual heartfelt tribute. He started off normal enough. Talked about her kindness, her generosity, how she'd devoted her life to helping others. Standard eulogy stuff. People were nodding, dabbing at their eyes with tissues. Then his tone shifted. He paused, looked down at his notes, and when he looked back up, something in his expression had changed. That's when he said it. Aunt Marie wasn't his biological mother. The room went still. Not the respectful kind of still. The confused kind. People glanced at each other, unsure if they'd heard him correctly. I thought maybe he was about to explain that he was adopted, that this was going to be some touching story about chosen family. It wasn't. Jake kept talking. He said Aunt Marie had stolen him from his real mother, who was her own sister. My brain couldn't process it at first. Aunt Marie had a sister who died young. We all knew that. Tragic car accident years ago. But Jake was saying she didn't die. She was alive, or had been, and Aunt Marie had taken Jake from her after a custody battle that was built on lies. People started shifting in their seats. My uncle, Marie's husband, stood up from the front pew. His face had gone completely white. He started moving toward the podium, but Jake saw him coming and spoke faster. He said Aunt Marie had forged documents, medical records, psychiatric evaluations, anything she could use to paint her sister as unfit. She'd bribed officials, paid off social workers, manipulated the court system, all to take Jake away from his real mom and raise him as her own. And the worst part, the part that made my stomach drop, our entire family had known, not suspected, known, and they'd helped cover it up for 30 years. The chapel wasn't silent anymore. People were murmuring, some loudly. My uncle reached the podium and tried to grab the microphone, but Jake held on. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. He pulled out papers from his jacket, DNA tests, legal documents, letters his real mother had written, begging to see him, letters that had been hidden from him his entire childhood. This is where it gets absurd. Jake said his real mom had died 5 years ago. She'd spent decades trying to get him back, filing appeals, writing letters that were intercepted, showing up at family events only to be turned away and threatened with restraining orders. The family had painted her as unstable, dangerous, a liar, and Jake had believed it. He'd believed Aunt Marie was his savior, that she'd rescued him from a terrible situation, until he found a box in her attic 6 months ago while helping her move some old furniture. Inside that box was everything: the forged documents, the bribe receipts, the letters from his real mum, even a journal where Aunt Marie had written about how she couldn't have children of her own, how she deserved Jake more than her sister did, how she'd do whatever it took to make him hers. It was all there, in her own handwriting. A confession she'd never meant anyone to see. People started standing up. Some were shouting, others were crying. My grandmother, Aunt Marie's mother, was in the front row looking like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. She didn't deny it. She just sat there, staring at her hands. That told me everything I needed to know. My uncle finally ripped the microphone away from Jake, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Jake had already said everything he needed to say. He walked off the stage, past my uncle, past the rows of horrified faces, and straight out the chapel doors. Half the attendees followed him out. The other half stayed, frozen, unsure what to do. Someone called the police, I don't even know who. Within 20 minutes, there were officers at the chapel asking questions, taking statements. The funeral director looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The whole thing devolved into chaos. People were arguing, accusing, defending. Families that had been close for decades were suddenly screaming at each other in a church parking lot. You almost have to admire the audacity of keeping a lie that big for that long. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The foundation that bore Aunt Marie's name, the one she'd built her entire public image around, collapsed within 2 weeks. Donors pulled out. Board members resigned. Investigations were launched into where the money had actually gone, because once people start digging into one lie, they find others. Turns out some of those charitable donations had been funneled into legal fees to keep Jake's real mom away. Our family hasn't spoken since. I mean that literally. The group chat went silent. Holiday plans were cancelled. My parents stopped talking to my grandmother. Cousins blocked each other on social media. Jake disappeared entirely. Last I heard, he moved across the country and changed his name. I don't blame him. I keep thinking about how perfect everything seemed, how Aunt Marie was the person everyone aspired to be, how we all looked up to her, trusted her, built our family identity around her values. And the whole time it was a lie. Not just a small lie, a foundational one. The kind that, once exposed, makes you question every memory, every story, every piece of family history you thought you knew. The thing that gets me is how many people knew. It wasn't just Aunt Marie. It was my grandparents, my uncle, probably a handful of other relatives who helped maintain the cover-up. They all chose to protect the lie instead of the truth. They chose Aunt Marie's reputation over Jake's right to know his own mother, and they got away with it for 30 years, right up until the moment Jake found that box. One speech destroyed everything we thought we knew, everything we thought we were. And honestly, maybe that's exactly what needed to happen, because a family built on that kind of foundation doesn't deserve to stand. Family secrets have a way of unraveling everything, and the next person learned that lesson when they discovered something hidden in plain sight, right inside their own car. I should have known something was off when my ex started knowing things he shouldn't. Little things at first. He'd mentioned that new coffee shop I tried on the other side of town, the one I'd never posted about or told him existed. He'd ask how my friend Sarah was doing, right after I'd grabbed lunch with her at a place we'd never been to before. He knew I'd taken a different route home from work, even though we hadn't spoken in weeks. Every time I brushed it off as coincidence or maybe mutual friends filling him in. But the feeling in my gut kept getting worse. We'd broken up 3 months earlier, and honestly, it was overdue. He was controlling during the relationship, always needing to know where I was, who I was with, what time I'd be home. The breakup was messy but necessary, and I thought cutting contact would be the end of it. Except he kept texting, kept calling, kept showing up places I happened to be. He'd say it was just chance that we lived in the same area, that we had the same favorite spots, but the frequency was unsettling. I started feeling watched, like someone had installed cameras in my daily routine. The paranoia was eating me alive. I'd check over my shoulder constantly, change plans last minute just to see if he'd still show up, avoid posting anything on social media. My friends thought I was being dramatic. They'd say he was probably just checking my Instagram stories or asking around. But it felt deeper than that. He knew things that weren't online. He knew conversations I'd had in my car with the windows up. He knew exactly when I left for work, when I got home, when I went to the gym. It was like he had a direct feed into my life. Then my car started making a weird noise. Nothing major, just a rattle under the passenger seat that wouldn't quit. I took it to my mechanic, a guy I'd been going to for years, and asked him to check it out. He called me 20 minutes later, and his voice had this edge to it I'd never heard before. He told me to come back to the shop immediately and to bring someone with me if I could. My stomach dropped. When I got there, he walked me into the bay and pointed under the passenger seat. Tucked up inside the frame, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was a small black device about the size of a deck of cards. It had a lens, a camera lens, and next to it, a GPS tracker, both wired into my car's electrical system so they'd never run out of battery. My mechanic said they'd been professionally installed, the kind of setup that cost money and required knowledge. This wasn't some cheap tracker from Amazon. Someone had planned this. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Everything clicked into place. Every random encounter, every too specific comment, every time he knew where I'd been or who I'd seen. He'd been watching me, listening to me, tracking every move I made for months. I wanted to throw up right there in the shop. My own car, the one place I thought was private, had been turned into a surveillance vehicle. I couldn't even process how violated I felt. This is where patience finally snapped. My mechanic offered to rip the devices out, but I stopped him. If my ex had access to the feed, removing them would tip him off that I knew, and I wanted him to keep thinking he had the upper hand. So instead, I asked my mechanic to leave everything exactly as it was. I thanked him, paid for the inspection, and drove home like nothing had happened. But inside, I was already planning. I started feeding him lies, carefully crafted, believable lies. I'd get in my car and have fake phone conversations with friends about moving to a city 4 hours away. I'd talk about job interviews that didn't exist, about how excited I was to start fresh somewhere new. I drove to random apartment complexes and parked outside for 20 minutes, pretending to tour units. I'd mention a new guy I was seeing, someone tall and successful who treated me right, completely fictional, but described in enough detail to make it convincing. Every word was performance, and he was watching every second. The results were immediate. He started texting me more frantically, asking if I was really moving, if I was serious about leaving, if this new guy was real. I played dumb, asking how he even knew about any of that. He'd backtrack, say a mutual friend told him, but the desperation in his messages was obvious. Then he started showing up. I'd drive to an empty parking lot across town, sit there for 10 minutes, then leave. Sure enough, within a half hour, I'd get a text from him asking if I was in that part of town. One time he actually showed up while I was still there, parked 3 rows away, just sitting in his car watching. I took a photo, added it to the folder, and here's where it gets absurd. He started spiraling. The texts went from concerned to unhinged. He accused me of lying to him, of playing games, of trying to hurt him on purpose. He said he loved me, that we were supposed to be together, that this new guy would never treat me as well as he did. He showed up at my actual apartment twice, banging on the door at midnight, yelling about how I owed him a conversation. My neighbors called the cops both times, but he'd leave before they arrived. I documented everything: screenshots, voicemails, doorbell camera footage, photos of his car parked outside my building. I kept a detailed log with dates, times, and descriptions of every incident. After 2 weeks of this, I had enough evidence to bury him. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in stalking cases, and she told me exactly what to do. We filed for a restraining order and submitted every piece of evidence I'd collected, including a written statement from my mechanic about finding the devices. The hearing was scheduled fast, and I showed up with a binder 3 inches thick. My ex didn't even bring a lawyer. He thought he could charm his way through it, explain that he was just worried about me, that we had history and he cared. The judge wasn't having it. She reviewed the evidence, watched clips from the camera feed that my lawyer had pulled, listened to the voicemails, and looked at the pattern of behavior. Then she asked my ex directly if he'd installed the devices. He tried to deny it at first, but when she pointed out that the footage included him installing them in a parking garage, he crumbled. Started crying, saying he just wanted to make sure I was safe, that he loved me too much to let me go. The judge's face didn't change. She granted the restraining order immediately, and then she did something I didn't expect. She contacted the police right there in the courtroom. They arrested him on the spot. Stalking, illegal surveillance, harassment. He was led out in handcuffs, still crying, still trying to explain that he'd done it out of love. I sat there feeling numb, watching this person I'd once cared about get exactly what he deserved. The whole thing felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. They wrote their own ending without realizing it. I sold the car 2 days later. Didn't matter that it was paid off or that I loved that car. I couldn't sit in it without feeling his eyes on me. I bought a new one, used but reliable, and the first time I drove it alone, I cried. Not sad tears, relieved ones. I checked every inch of that car myself, had a different mechanic sweep it for devices, installed my own dash cam for peace of mind. It took months before I stopped checking over my shoulder every time I got in, before I stopped scanning parking lots for his car. He violated a restraining order once. About 6 weeks later, sent me an email from a fake account, apologizing and begging for another chance. I forwarded it to my lawyer and he got another charge added. After that, nothing. I don't know where he is now and I don't care. The restraining order is good for 3 years, and if he ever tries anything again, he's looking at serious jail time. Sometimes I think about how close I came to just living with the paranoia, convincing myself I was imagining things, letting him get away with it because I didn't have proof. But that little rattle under my seat changed everything. One random mechanical issue led to discovering months of surveillance, and it gave me the evidence I needed to finally be free. I'm careful now in ways I wasn't before. I check my car regularly, I'm cautious about who I let into my life, and I trust my gut when something feels wrong. Because sometimes that feeling isn't paranoia. Sometimes someone really is watching. Technology can betray us in the worst ways, but sometimes the betrayal comes from the people we trust most, like the next person who discovered their sister had stolen something far more personal than any possession. My sister Emma has always been dramatic, but I never thought she'd stoop to identity theft and fraud to cover up her own mess. This whole thing started innocently enough. I'd done one of those DNA ancestry tests for fun. You know the kind, spit in a tube and find out you're 3% Scandinavian or whatever. It was just something to do during lockdown boredom. Emma and I shared passwords for everything back then because we trusted each other like idiots apparently trust each other. Then Emma announced she was pregnant. Big family dinner, tears of joy, the whole production. She named her ex-boyfriend Rich as the father. Rich immediately denied it, said the timeline didn't match up, that they'd been broken up for months before she got pregnant. Emma insisted he was lying, that he was just trying to dodge responsibility. The family, predictably, rallied around Emma. Mum started calling Rich. Dad sent him stern emails about stepping up and being a man. Rich's life became a nightmare of family pressure and accusations. I felt bad for the guy, honestly, but I also trusted my sister. Why would she lie about something like that? Rich seemed genuinely confused and kept saying the math didn't work, but Emma had an answer for everything. She cried a lot. She talked about how betrayed she felt. She played the victim so convincingly that even I started thinking maybe Rich was just in denial. But that wasn't even the worst part. About 6 weeks into this whole mess, Rich messaged me directly. We'd always gotten along fine, he was a decent guy, and the message was polite but desperate. He said Emma had sent him DNA test results proving he was the father, but something about the document looked off to him. The formatting was weird. Some of the information didn't make sense. He asked if I knew anything about how these tests worked, since I'd mentioned doing one myself. I told him I'd look into it, mostly just to ease his mind. I figured Emma had gotten a legitimate test done, and maybe the lab just had weird formatting or something. I logged into my DNA testing account to see if I could compare the layout. That's when I saw it. Someone had accessed my account 3 days earlier. The login was from Emma's laptop. I know because the site shows you device information, and I recognized her old MacBook from the identifier. My stomach dropped. I pulled up my results and everything looked normal at first. Then I downloaded the PDF report and compared it to the screenshot Rich had sent me. The document Emma gave him was my test, my actual DNA results, except she'd gone in and doctored it, changed my name to hers, photoshopped in a fabricated paternal match connecting her to Rich. She'd literally stolen my genetic information and forged a paternity test. I sat there staring at my screen for a solid 10 minutes, just processing the audacity. My own sister had committed fraud, using my identity to trap her ex-boyfriend into taking responsibility for a pregnancy that wasn't his. The betrayal was so layered I didn't even know where to start being angry. I called Rich immediately, told him what I'd found. He went quiet for a long time and then just said, "I knew something was wrong. I knew it." The relief in his voice was heartbreaking. This man had been gaslighted by my entire family for weeks, called a deadbeat and a liar, and he'd been right the whole time. Here's where it gets absurd. I confronted Emma privately first, gave her a chance to come clean, to tell the family the truth, to do literally anything resembling the right thing. She denied everything, said I was misreading the situation, that I must have confused my own results, that Rich had probably manipulated me. She actually tried to gaslight me about my own DNA test. The nerve of this woman. I told her she had until her baby shower to tell everyone the truth. Otherwise, I would. She laughed, actually laughed, said I wouldn't dare ruin her special day, that the family would never believe me over her anyway. She'd always been the golden child and she knew it. So I let her have her baby shower, showed up with a gift and a smile, played dumb through the whole thing, the games, the cake, the cooing relatives talking about how Rich better get his act together. Emma was glowing, completely confident that she'd won. Then came time for the slideshow. Emma had prepared this whole montage of ultrasound photos and baby preparation pictures set to sappy music. Everyone gathered in the living room. I volunteered to help set up the projector. How helpful of me. Except instead of Emma's slideshow, I pulled up a different presentation. 2 documents side by side on the big screen. On the left, my actual DNA results with my name clearly visible. On the right, the forged version Emma had sent to Rich with my name poorly edited out and hers inserted, along with the fabricated paternity match. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. I didn't say anything at first, just let people read, watched their faces change as they processed what they were seeing. Mum's hand went to her mouth. Dad's face turned red. Rich, who Emma had reluctantly invited under family pressure, stood up and walked out. Just left. Can't say I blamed him. Emma started screaming, calling me jealous, saying I'd fabricated the whole thing, that I was trying to ruin her life. But Dad's a lawyer and he knows what document fraud looks like. He asked her directly if she doctored my DNA results. She couldn't answer, just kept crying and yelling. Mom asked the question everyone was thinking. If Rich isn't the father, who is? The real story came out in pieces over the next few days. Emma had been cheating on Rich before they broke up. Got pregnant by some guy she'd met at a bar. Didn't even get his last name. When she realized she was pregnant and alone, she panicked and decided Rich was her best option. He had a good job, came from a nice family, would probably be a decent father. So she lied, and when he didn't believe her, she committed fraud to force the issue. Things went from bad to unhinged. The baby shower obviously ended early. Most of the family left without saying goodbye to Emma. A few aunts tried to be supportive, but you could tell even they were disturbed. Rich threatened legal action if Emma ever contacted him again. Dad had to talk him down from actually pressing charges for fraud. Mum was mortified. Her perfect daughter, the one who could do no wrong, had turned out to be a manipulative liar who'd stolen her own sister's identity. The disappointment was crushing to watch. Emma tried to apologize to me later, said she'd been desperate and scared and made a terrible choice. I told her that stealing someone's genetic information and committing fraud wasn't a choice made in desperation. It was calculated and deliberate. She'd had multiple opportunities to come clean, and instead she doubled down every single time. She moved 2 states away about a month after the baby was born. Needed a fresh start, apparently. Somewhere people didn't know what she'd done. We don't talk. Mom sends me updates sometimes that I don't ask for. The baby's fine, Emma's working some retail job, dating someone new who doesn't know the full story yet. I changed all my passwords, every single account, every piece of shared access, set up 2-factor authentication on everything. I'd trusted Emma with that information because she was family, and family was supposed to mean something. Lesson learned, I guess. The whole thing still makes me angry when I think about it. Not just what she did to me, but what she did to Rich. That man spent weeks being harassed and pressured, and called a deadbeat by people who should have listened to him. His reputation took a hit in our community. And for what? Because Emma was too proud to admit she'd screwed up? Rich actually thanked me afterwards, sent a message saying he didn't know how to repay me for clearing his name. I told him he didn't owe me anything, that the truth should have been enough from the start. He deserved better than what my family put him through. Looking back, I think the worst part was watching Emma at that baby shower, so confident and smug, thinking she'd gotten away with it. She really believed she could lie and manipulate her way through life without consequences. The shocked look on her face when those documents went up on the screen almost made the whole nightmare worth it. Almost. Some lies are built on documents and deception, but others are built on entire secret lives, which is exactly what the next person uncovered about their father. My dad traveled for work twice a month, every month, like clockwork. He'd pack his little rolling suitcase, kiss my mum on the cheek, ruffle my hair when I was younger, and head out for what he called regional sales meetings. This had been the routine for 15 years. 15 years of the same explanation, the same pattern, the same trustworthy dad performance. I never questioned it. Why would I? He was my father. He showed up to my school events when he was in town. He paid the bills. He seemed happy enough. My mum never seemed suspicious. It was just normal life, until I saw him at a gas station 3 hours from our house on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was driving back from visiting a college friend, stopped to fill up and grab terrible coffee, and there he was, pumping gas into a car I'd never seen before. For a second I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it was someone who just looked like him. But then he turned and I saw his face clearly. Definitely him. Same slightly crooked nose from a soccer injury in his 20s. Same way of standing with his weight on one leg. He wasn't alone. There was a woman in the passenger seat, not my mum, and 2 teenagers in the back. A boy and a girl, maybe 15 and 17. The girl had my dad's nose. The boy had his eyes. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I don't know what possessed me to follow them. Shock, maybe. Disbelief. The absolute wrongness of what I was seeing. I got back in my car and kept a few vehicles between us as he drove through neighborhoods I didn't recognize, finally pulling into the driveway of a modest 2-story house with a basketball hoop and a dog barking in the yard. They all got out. The woman kissed him. Not a peck, a real kiss. The kind you give someone you're married to. The teenagers grabbed groceries from the trunk. My dad scratched the dog's ears. They went inside like a normal family coming home on a normal day. I sat in my car down the street, shaking with rage and disbelief, and took photos. Lots of photos. The house, the car, him with them. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. He had a whole second family, a wife, teenagers who were clearly his biological children. A mortgage, probably, a dog, a life. While my mum waited at home thinking he was in conference rooms discussing quarterly targets, he was here playing dad to a completely different set of kids. The math started clicking into place. Those twice monthly trips, 15 years, these kids were probably 14 and 16. He'd been doing this since before they were born, maybe longer. I drove home in a daze, my brain refusing to process what I'd just seen. When I got there, Mom was making dinner, humming along to the radio. She asked how my trip was. I lied, said it was fine. I couldn't figure out how to tell her, couldn't find the words to detonate her entire life. That night I confronted him, called his cell and told him I knew, told him I'd followed him, told him I had photos. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he started begging, not denying, not explaining, just begging me not to tell my mum. He said he'd made mistakes, that it was complicated, that he loved us both. Like that made it better somehow. Like loving two families excused destroying them both. You almost have to admire the audacity. I gave him 1 week, 7 days to come clean to Mom himself, to handle this like an adult, to take responsibility for once in his apparently very complicated life. I told him if he didn't tell her, I would. He promised he would. Said he just needed time to figure out how. A week passed, then another day, then 2 more. He didn't say anything, just kept up the normal routine, kissing Mum goodbye before his next work trip, acting like our conversation had never happened, like I hadn't just handed him an ultimatum. This is where patience finally snapped. I planned a birthday dinner for him, sent out invitations to both families, told my mum it was a surprise party at a nice restaurant downtown, told the other woman whose name I'd found on the mortgage records the same thing. Different time slots, 15 minutes apart, close enough that they'd overlap, far enough that everyone would actually show up. My mum arrived first, dressed up, excited to celebrate. She'd even bought him a new watch, wrapped it herself with the paper he always complained was too expensive to buy. Then the other family walked in. The woman, the 2 teenagers, even the freaking dog waited outside. I watched my mum's face as she registered them. The confusion first, then recognition as she looked at the kids, saw my dad's features reflected back, then horror. The other woman saw my mum at the same table, saw the decorations, saw me standing there with my phone out recording the whole thing because I needed her to believe me later when she inevitably questioned her own memory of this moment. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Both women started talking at once, asking questions, demanding answers. My dad, who'd just walked in from the parking lot, froze in the doorway. His face went white, then red, then white again. He actually tried to leave, just turn around and walk out. My mum grabbed his arm. The other woman blocked the door. The screaming started. Not just from the wives. The teenagers were yelling too. Other diners were staring. A manager rushed over. I just stood there, weirdly calm, watching 15 years of lies collapse in real time. Both women left him that night. My mum called her sister to pick her up because she refused to get in a car with him. The other woman took her kids and left separately. I drove myself home, sat in the driveway for an hour, and tried to process what I'd just orchestrated. The fallout was nuclear. My mom filed for divorce within days. Turns out the other woman had never legally married him, which meant my parents' marriage was valid and his other relationship was just extended fraud. Both women compared notes, found out he'd been lying to both of them about finances, about time, about everything. He'd taken out credit cards in my mum's name, forged documents. The legal mess took months to untangle. My half-siblings and I barely speak. We've tried a few times. Awkward coffee meetings where we don't know what to say to each other. We're siblings, but also strangers. Also reminders of the worst thing that ever happened to each other's families. It's complicated in ways I don't think we'll ever fully work through. Mum's in therapy. She's doing better, slowly. Some days are harder than others. She started painting again. Something she gave up years ago. She says she's reclaiming parts of herself she forgot existed. Dad lives alone now. Lost his job when the financial fraud came to light. Both families took him for everything in court. He rents a studio apartment and works some entry-level position that barely covers his expenses. Last I heard, he tried to reach out to me. I blocked his number. He wrote letters. I returned them unopened. He destroyed two families because he wanted both, wanted the respect and love and trust without actually earning it, wanted to be the hero in two different stories without considering that eventually those stories would intersect. The thing is, he could have left, could have made a choice. It would have been painful and messy, but honest. Instead, he chose deception. Chose to let us all live half-lives built on lies, while he played pretend in two different homes. People ask if I regret exposing him the way I did, if the public humiliation was too far. I don't. He had a week to do the right thing. He chose not to. I just made sure the truth came out in a way that couldn't be denied or minimized, or explained away with more lies. Both my mom and the other woman deserve to know. The teenagers deserve to know. I deserve to stop carrying his secret. He deserves nothing. Not my forgiveness. Not my mum's. Not anyone's. He made his choices. Now he gets to live with them. Alone. Parental betrayal cuts deep, but sometimes it's not just fathers. Mothers can wield secrets like weapons too, as the next person learned when their engagement became collateral damage. My fiancé Mark and I were planning our wedding when my mum decided to become a one-woman wrecking crew. At first it was small things, comments about how Mark seemed immature for his age, questions about whether we were rushing into things, even though we'd been together for 3 years, little digs about his job, his family, his car, the way he dressed. I brushed it off as typical mother-of-the-bride anxiety. Then it escalated. She started criticizing him openly at family dinners, talking over him when he tried to contribute to conversations, making faces when he'd mention our wedding plans. My dad noticed but didn't say anything, just gave me these apologetic looks across the table, like he knew something was wrong but didn't want to get involved. The real problem started when she began spreading rumors to extended family. Aunts and uncles I barely talked to were suddenly calling me with concerns. They'd heard Mark had anger issues, that he'd been fired from multiple jobs, that he had debt problems. None of it was true. Mark was the most even-tempered person I'd ever met, had been at the same company for 5 years, and was financially responsible to the point of being boring about it. When I confronted Mom, she acted innocent, said she was just sharing concerns she'd heard from others, that she was trying to protect me. But I knew she was the source. The stories were too specific, too coordinated. She showed relatives' texts between Mark and me, completely out of context, making normal couple disagreements look like red flags. A text where he said he was frustrated about wedding planning became evidence he was controlling. A joke about him being bad at grocery shopping became proof he was incompetent. She was building a case against him, piece by piece, and I couldn't figure out why. Then came the breaking point. Mum went to my dad privately and convinced him that Mark was wrong for me, that I was making a huge mistake, that if they really loved me, they needed to intervene. Dad, who usually stayed out of family drama, actually called me and said if I married Mark, they were cutting me off financially. I was 26 years old with a decent job. Their financial support was minimal at that point, mostly them paying my car insurance and cell phone bill. But it wasn't about the money. It was about them weaponizing their support to control my life. It was about my own mother sabotaging my engagement for reasons she refused to explain. I demanded answers. She gave me vague responses about mother's intuition and protecting her daughter. Said I'd understand when I was a parent myself. It was patronizing and infuriating and made no sense. Mark was hurt, confused. He'd always been respectful to my parents, tried to win them over, participated in family events even when my mom was openly cold to him. He asked what he'd done wrong. I didn't have an answer. Then I found the emails. Mum had given me her old iPad when she upgraded, told me to factory reset it and keep it or sell it, whatever I wanted. I was clearing out her accounts before wiping it when I saw an email folder labeled with initials I didn't recognize. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside were years of correspondence between my mum and someone named David, Mark's uncle David, messages going back almost a decade. Romantic messages, explicit messages, plans to meet up when David was in town for business, hotels, lies they'd told their respective spouses. The affair had ended about 5 years ago, badly from what I could piece together. David had wanted to leave his wife for my mum. She'd refused, said she wouldn't destroy her family. He'd called her a coward. They'd had a massive fight and stopped speaking. And here's where it gets absurd. My mum wasn't trying to protect me from Mark. She was terrified Mark would somehow connect the dots about her and David. That family events would bring them into contact. that David might let something slip, or that old emails might surface, or that Mark's family already knew and would tell my dad. Her entire campaign against my engagement was about burying her own past. She was willing to destroy my relationship, my happiness, my trust in her, all to keep a secret that might not even come out. I sat with that iPad for hours reading through years of betrayal. Not just the affair itself, but the calculated lies. The times she'd told Dad she was visiting her sister but was really meeting David. The family vacations where she'd snuck away to call him. The sheer volume of deception. I was done. Completely done. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. Extended family would be there. Mark's family had been invited because our families were supposed to be merging, back when my parents pretended to support our engagement. I decided that would be the perfect time. The day arrived, both families gathered at my parents' house. Turkey, stuffing, the whole traditional spread. Everyone was seated, saying what they were grateful for, the usual wholesome Thanksgiving performance. When it was my turn, I stood up, said I was grateful for clarity, for finally understanding why some people act the way they do. I pulled out my phone where I'd forwarded the most damning emails to myself. I calmly explained that Mom had been sabotaging my engagement because she'd had an affair with Mark's Uncle David 5 years ago and was terrified the truth would come out if our families became connected through marriage. I read excerpts from the emails, dates, hotel names, the things they'd said to each other. The room went dead silent except for the sound of someone's fork hitting their plate. Dad's face went from confused to pale to red in about 10 seconds. Mark's parents looked at David, who'd gone completely white. Mark's aunt started crying. My mom tried to speak, stammered something about privacy and how dare I, but I cut her off. I told her she'd tried to ruin my life to protect her secret, that she'd lied about Mark, manipulated Dad, turned family against us, that she'd chosen her own comfort over my happiness, and that I was done protecting her from the consequences of her own choices. Dad stood up and left the table, just walked out of the house. Several relatives followed him. David's wife was screaming at him. Mark sat next to me, holding my hand, looking shell-shocked but supportive. His parents were trying to process that their son's fiancée's mother had been sleeping with his uncle. This feels like a deleted scene from the world's most dysfunctional family drama. My mom tried to do damage control, but there was no containing it. The affair was out. The manipulation was exposed. Dad moved into a hotel that night, started divorce proceedings within the month. He felt betrayed on multiple levels, not just the affair, but the fact that she'd tried to destroy my engagement to cover it up. Mark's family was a mess too. David's wife filed for divorce even though the affair had ended years ago. The breach of trust was too much. Mark's parents were embarrassed and apologetic, like they somehow should have known or prevented it. Mark and I eloped 2 weeks later. Just us, a courthouse, and 2 witnesses we pulled from the waiting room. No reception, no family drama, no speeches. We sent a photo to select relatives with a simple message that we were married and happy and didn't want any contact from people who'd tried to sabotage us. My mum lost everything trying to bury her past. Her marriage, her relationship with me, her standing in the family, the respect she'd built over decades, all because she couldn't face the consequences of her own actions years ago. She's tried to reach out a few times, letters mostly because I blocked her number. They're always the same, apologies mixed with justifications, explanations about how scared she was, how she thought she was protecting everyone. She never quite takes full responsibility. There's always a but. I don't respond. Neither does Dad. He's rebuilding his life, dating someone new, seems genuinely happier. He apologized to Mark and me for going along with Mum's manipulation, said he should have questioned her more instead of just trusting her version of events. Mark and I are doing great. Married life without the weight of family sabotage is pretty peaceful. We see his parents occasionally, carefully avoiding any events where David might show up. It's awkward but manageable. Looking back, I think the saddest part is that Mum could have just stayed quiet. The affair was over. David wasn't going to say anything. Our families could have merged through marriage without the past ever surfacing. But her guilt and paranoia turned a buried secret into a nuclear bomb that destroyed everything around her. She created the exact disaster she was trying to prevent, and she lost her daughter in the process. Affairs have a way of poisoning everything they touch, but sometimes the poison spreads even further, especially when legal documents get involved, like what happened with the next person's grandmother's will. My grandma died on a Tuesday in March, surrounded by family, after a long and frankly exhausting battle with cancer. She was 92 and had lived a full life, so while we were sad, there was also relief that she wasn't suffering anymore. The funeral was beautiful. Everyone shared stories about her sharp wit and her terrible cooking, and how she never let anyone leave her house without at least 3 containers of leftovers. A week later, we all gathered at the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. Grandma had always been clear about her wishes. She wanted her estate split equally among her grandchildren. There were 6 of us: the house, her savings, a few investments, nothing extravagant but enough to be meaningful. She told us this herself multiple times over the years. No surprises, no drama, just fair and equal. Except my cousin Brad showed up with a new will. He walked in late, which was typical Brad behavior, and slapped a document down on the lawyer's desk like he was playing a winning hand in poker. Said he'd found it in Grandma's things when he was helping clean out a house. This will was dated 3 weeks before she died and named him as the sole beneficiary of everything. The room went dead quiet. My aunt started crying. My uncle demanded to see it. The lawyer, clearly uncomfortable, examined the document carefully. It looked official: notarized signature, witness signatures, proper legal language, everything you'd expect from a legitimate will. Brad sat there looking smug, said Grandma had changed her mind in her final weeks, that she'd wanted him to have everything because he'd been so helpful during her illness. Which was rich considering Brad had visited her maybe twice in the last year, and both times he'd asked for money. The thing about Brad is that Grandma actually hated him, not in a subtle way. She'd told me directly, multiple times, that Brad was a thief and a liar. He'd stolen jewelry from her house 5 years earlier and pawned it. She'd caught him, but the family swept it under the rug to keep the peace. She never forgave him. The idea that she'd leave him everything was absurd, but the lawyer said the document appeared legitimate. He'd need time to verify it, but on first glance, it seemed to meet all legal requirements. Brad's smirk got wider. The rest of us just sat there in shock. I refused to believe it. Not because I cared about the money, though obviously I wasn't thrilled about losing my inheritance. I refused to believe it because I knew Grandma. She wouldn't do this, not to Brad, not after what he'd done. So I hired a forensic document analyst. Cost me $1,500 I didn't really have, but I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. The analyst took 2 weeks to complete her examination. When she called me with the results, I could hear the certainty in her voice. The signature was traced, not forged freehand, actually traced from another document. She could see the pressure points where someone had gone over an existing signature. The notary stamp was fake. She'd contacted the notary whose information was on the document, and they had no record of ever notarizing anything for my grandmother. And here's the kicker. The paper itself, the actual physical paper the will was printed on, had a manufacturing date code. That specific stock hadn't been produced until 2 weeks after Grandma died. Brad had forged the entire thing. This is where it gets absurd. I brought everything to the police. The analysis report, the timeline, the notary's statement. They opened an investigation immediately. Turned out Brad hadn't worked alone. His girlfriend was a paralegal at a small law firm. She'd helped him create the document, knew enough about legal formatting to make it look convincing. They'd planned to split the money and move out of state. Had apartment listings saved, job applications submitted, the whole exit strategy ready to go. The police arrested them both on a Thursday morning. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft. The charges kept stacking up. Brad tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, that he'd found the will and assumed it was real. But they found drafts of the forged document on his girlfriend's laptop. Found receipts for the paper, for the fake notary stamp they'd ordered online. The evidence was overwhelming. The family was in chaos. My aunt, Brad's mum, kept insisting there must be some mistake, that her son wouldn't do something like this. Even when faced with literal proof, she made excuses. My uncle wanted nothing to do with him, told Brad he was dead to him. The rest of us were just trying to process that someone in our family had tried to steal our grandmother's legacy. The original will was honored. Estate split 6 ways, just like Grandma wanted. By the time legal fees and the cost of the investigation were paid, we each got a little less than expected, but honestly, I didn't care. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about making sure Grandma's actual wishes were respected. Then came the breaking point. Brad's girlfriend took a plea deal, testified against him in exchange for reduced charges, told the prosecutor everything, how it had been Brad's idea from the start, how he'd convinced her it was victimless, that the family was rich anyway and wouldn't miss it, how they'd practiced the signature dozens of times before he felt confident enough to trace it onto the final document. Brad went to trial, represented himself after burning through 2 public defenders who told him to take a plea, stood up in court and tried to argue that Grandma had verbally promised him the inheritance, that he was just documenting her wishes. The judge wasn't having it. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. He got 4 years. Could have been worse, but the judge considered that it was a family matter and no money had actually changed hands since we'd caught it early. Still, 4 years in prison for trying to steal from your dead grandmother feels almost poetic. Brad's mum stopped coming to family events, too ashamed or maybe still in denial. Brad's siblings changed their last name. His dad, who'd divorced his mum years ago, gave an interview to the local paper saying he wasn't surprised that Brad had always been trouble. Family dynamics that were already complicated became completely fractured. I visited Grandma's grave after the sentencing, brought flowers and sat there telling her about everything that had happened, how we'd caught him, how he was going to prison, how her real will was being honored. I'd like to think she would have been proud. Not of the family falling apart, but of the fact that someone fought for the truth, that her legacy wasn't stolen by the one grandkid she'd explicitly not trusted. The whole thing taught me that people will do unthinkable things when they think they can get away with it. Brad genuinely believed he'd covered his tracks, thought a fake notary stamp and some trace signatures would be enough. Never considered that someone might actually investigate. Never thought about the paper itself having a date code. The arrogance of it still blows my mind. My inheritance from Grandma sits in a savings account. I haven't touched it. Part of me wants to use it for something she would have approved of. Maybe a scholarship fund or a donation to the Cancer Research Center where she was treated. Something that honors her memory better than just paying down student loans or buying a car. Brad gets out in 2 years with good behavior. I don't know what happens then. If he'll try to reconnect with the family, if anyone will even take his calls. I know I won't. Some bridges once burned don't get rebuilt, and some betrayals are too calculated to forgive. Grandma always said that character is what you do when nobody's watching. Brad showed his character, and now he gets to live with the consequences. Greed can make people do unthinkable things, but sometimes the unthinkable isn't about money. It's about hidden children and shattered trust, like what the next person stumbled upon. I was helping my brother move when I found the box. He'd asked me to pack up his home office while he dealt with the kitchen. Said I could toss anything that looked like junk. Most of it was old textbooks and random cables, the usual stuff people accumulate and never use. Then I opened a shoebox tucked in the back of his closet. Inside were photos, baby pictures, a little girl with my brother's eyes and his distinctive dimple on her left cheek. Birthday cards addressed to someone named Lily. Receipts for child support payments going back 7 years. Legal documents with his signature acknowledging paternity. My hands were shaking as I flipped through everything, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My brother had a daughter, a 7-year-old daughter he'd never mentioned to anyone. I sat there on his office floor, surrounded by moving boxes, holding evidence of a whole secret life. This wasn't some distant relative's kid or a friend's child. These were official documents with his name, monthly payments deducted from his bank account, a child who existed and who he'd been deliberately hiding from our entire family. When he came upstairs to check on my progress, I was still holding the photos. He saw the box, saw my face, and immediately knew. The color drained from him. He tried to explain before I could even ask questions, words tumbling out in a panicked rush. He'd gotten a girl pregnant in college. They weren't dating, it was a one-time thing at a party. When she told him she was pregnant and keeping the baby, he denied it was his, refused to acknowledge it, blocked her number, told himself it wasn't his problem. Then she filed for child support and requested a DNA test. The test came back positive. He was the father. No question. Instead of coming clean to our family, he quietly started making payments, signed the legal documents, sent money every month, and never said a word to anyone. Not to our parents, not to his wife who he married 3 years ago, not to me. He begged me to stay quiet, said telling everyone now would destroy his marriage, devastate our parents, ruin everything he'd built. He promised he'd tell them eventually. Just not right now. Not like this. He actually got on his knees and begged. I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep this secret. His wife deserved to know that the man she married had a child he'd been hiding for years. Our parents deserved to know they had a granddaughter they'd never met, especially after spending years begging my brother and his wife to have kids. And honestly, that little girl deserved better than a father who treated her like a shameful secret. I told him he had 24 hours to come clean to everyone himself. Otherwise I would. He didn't. So I did. I started with his wife, called her and asked to meet for coffee, showed her everything. The photos, the receipts, the legal documents. She sat across from me in that cafe, tears streaming down her face, holding a picture of a little girl who looked exactly like her husband. She kept saying she didn't understand, that they'd talked about having kids, that he'd said he wasn't ready yet. The whole time he'd had a daughter he was hiding. She left him that night, packed a bag and went to her sister's place, filed for divorce within the week. Then I told our parents. That's when everything unraveled. Mum broke down completely. She'd been asking for grandchildren for years, showing them baby clothes at stores, talking about how excited she was to be a grandmother someday. And the whole time there was already a grandchild out there. A 7-year-old girl she'd never met, never held, missed every milestone for. The betrayal in her eyes when I showed her the photos was devastating. Dad's reaction was different. He went quiet, dangerously quiet. Then he called my brother and told him to come to the house immediately. When my brother showed up, Dad didn't yell. He just asked one question. Why? My brother tried to explain, said he'd been scared, overwhelmed, too young to be a father, said he thought paying child support was enough, that he was meeting his legal obligation. Dad asked if he'd ever tried to meet his daughter. My brother admitted he hadn't. Dad told him to leave, said he didn't recognize the person his son had become. The family fractured in real time. Mum wanted to reach out to the little girl's mother to try and meet her granddaughter. Dad was furious at my brother, but also at me for exposing it this way. My brother's wife was filing for divorce and telling everyone who'd listen what he'd done. Extended family took sides. Some said I should have minded my own business. Others said they would have done the same thing. My brother tried to build a relationship with his daughter after everything came out. Reached out to her mother, said he wanted to be involved now, that he was ready to step up, but her mum wanted nothing to do with him. She'd raised Lily alone for 7 years while he pretended she didn't exist. She had a stable life now, a partner who treated Lily like his own daughter. She told my brother that showing up now, only because he got exposed, wasn't good enough. She was right. He'd had 7 years to make different choices, to acknowledge his daughter, to be part of her life. He'd chosen secrecy instead. Now he got to live with the consequences of that choice. Things went from bad to unhinged when my brother showed up at my apartment 3 months later. He was drunk, crying, saying I'd ruined his life, that his wife was gone, his parents barely spoke to him, he'd lost his daughter before ever really having her. He blamed me for all of it, said if I'd just kept my mouth shut, everything would have been fine. I told him nothing was fine. His marriage was built on lies. His relationship with our parents was built on deception. His daughter was growing up without a father because he was too cowardly to step up. I didn't ruin his life. I just refused to help him keep lying about it. He hasn't spoken to me since. Our parents are in therapy trying to process everything. Mom did eventually meet Lily once, supervised by her mother. It was awkward and emotional, and Mom cried for days afterward. Dad refuses to talk about it, says he doesn't know how to reconcile the son he raised with the man who could abandon his own child. The guilt people tried to put on me was intense. Family members said I should have let my brother handle it his own way, in his own time, that it wasn't my place to blow up his life. But here's the thing, it wasn't his secret alone. It involved other people, his wife, his daughter, our parents. They all had a right to the truth. Secrets that big don't deserve protection. They deserve exposure. Not out of cruelty, but because the people affected by them deserved to make informed choices about their own lives. His wife deserved to know who she was married to. His daughter deserved a chance at having a father who acknowledged her existence. Our parents deserved to know their grandchild. I think about Lily sometimes, about what her life is like, if she knows about us, if she cares. I hope she's happy. I hope she's loved. I hope she never feels like she was a secret that needed to be kept. My brother made his choices. I just refuse to be complicit in maintaining the lie. And if that makes me the villain in his story, I can live with that. Hidden children aren't the only things people conceal. Sometimes they hide entire second lives, complete with burner phones and alibis, as the next story reveals. My partner Alex kept a second phone hidden in the glove compartment. I found it completely by accident when the car charger broke, and I was digging around for the spare one I knew we kept somewhere in the car. My hand hit something hard and rectangular wedged way in the back, behind the registration and insurance papers. At first I thought it was an old phone Alex had forgotten about. We'd been together for 3 years. People accumulate stuff. But when I pulled it out, the screen lit up with a notification. The battery was charged. This wasn't some forgotten device. It was locked, obviously. I stared at it for a long moment, sitting in the parking lot of the grocery store, trying to decide if I was the kind of person who tried to break into their partner's secret phone. Turns out I was. I tried a few obvious combinations. Their birthday, my birthday. Nothing worked. Then I tried our anniversary, the day we met 3 years ago. The phone unlocked immediately. The sick irony of that password choice still makes me want to laugh and throw up at the same time. Inside was a whole other life. Dating apps with active profiles describing Alex as single and looking for something serious. Hotel receipts from places around the city, some from weekends when Alex had told me they were visiting their sister. Text message threads with someone named Jordan, full of heart emojis and plans for the future and intimate details that made my stomach turn. The messages with Jordan went back over a year. They talked about moving in together eventually, about trips they wanted to take, about how hard it was to find time to see each other with Jordan's work schedule. Jordan sent photos, selfies, pictures of meals they'd cooked, screenshots of apartments they were considering. Alex responded with the same energy, the same affection, the same promises of a future together. Jordan thought they were engaged. There were messages about ring shopping, about telling Jordan's parents, about planning a small ceremony sometime next year. Alex had proposed to someone else while living with me. I sat in that parking lot reading everything, going through months of messages, every hotel receipt, every dating app conversation. Some of the people Alex had messaged were clearly just hookups. Others seemed like they might have been longer affairs that fizzled out. But Jordan was different. Jordan was a whole relationship running parallel to ours. The nausea was overwhelming. 3 years of my life with someone who'd been lying the entire time. Every business trip, every late night at work, every weekend visiting family. How much of it had been real? Had any of it been real? I could have confronted Alex right then, driven home, thrown the phone at them, screamed about what a lying piece of garbage they were. But I didn't. Something in me wanted to be methodical about this, calculated. Alex had spent a year carefully constructing this double life. I wanted to be just as careful in tearing it down. Instead of confronting Alex, I messaged Jordan from my own phone, introduced myself as Alex's partner of 3 years, sent screenshots of our lease, photos from our last vacation, text messages between me and Alex talking about our future. Then I sent screenshots from the secret phone showing Jordan's conversations with Alex. Jordan responded within minutes, confusion first, then denial, then horror as the reality set in. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop the next day. But that wasn't even the worst part. When Jordan and I met, we compared timelines, dates, trips, promises. Everything overlapped. When Alex told me they were visiting their sister, they were with Jordan. When they told Jordan they had a work conference, they were with me. Sometimes Alex had even scheduled us on the same day, seeing Jordan for lunch and me for dinner, playing both relationships like some kind of sick game. Jordan had met Alex on a dating app 18 months ago. Alex had said they'd just gotten out of a long-term relationship and were looking for something real. They'd been exclusive within a month. Alex had introduced Jordan to friends, though looking back, Jordan realized it was always a specific group of friends, never family. Red flags that seemed obvious now but had been easy to rationalize at the time. We found more overlaps. Alex had given us both the same gifts for our birthdays, bought from the same store a week apart, had told us both the same stories about their childhood, used the same jokes, the same vulnerabilities to create intimacy. It was like Alex had a script they just performed for whoever was in front of them. Jordan was devastated. So was I. But underneath the devastation was this white-hot anger. Alex had built this elaborate structure of lies and thought they could maintain it indefinitely. Thought we'd never find out, never compare notes, never realize we were both being played. We decided to confront them together. Alex worked at a marketing firm downtown, one of those open-plan offices where everyone can see everything. Jordan and I showed up the next day during lunch when we knew most people would be around. We walked right up to Alex's desk. The look on their face was almost worth the pain of the previous 48 hours. Pure panic. Alex tried to play it off, asked what we were both doing there, suggested we go somewhere private to talk. I said no. Whatever they had to say, they could say it here. Jordan asked if we were engaged. Alex went pale. I asked if there were others besides us. Alex started trying to explain, making excuses, saying it wasn't what it looked like, even though it was exactly what it looked like. Their co-workers were staring. Someone's desk phone started ringing, but nobody answered it. The entire office had gone quiet, everyone watching this confrontation unfold. Jordan pulled out their phone and started reading text messages out loud. The ones where Alex talked about our future together, about the ring, about the wedding. Then I pulled out my phone and read messages from the same time period, where Alex was telling me how much they loved our life together, how happy they were with me. Alex's boss came over, asked if there was a problem. I told him his employee had been lying to multiple people, maintaining entire secret relationships, and using company time and resources to do it based on some of the timestamps on messages sent during work hours. Here's where it gets absurd. Alex tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that Jordan and I were exaggerating, taking things out of context. They actually looked at their boss and suggested we were both unstable, that this was some kind of coordinated harassment. Jordan, bless them, pulled up the dating app profiles on the secret phone right there. Showed them to anyone who wanted to look. Active profiles describing Alex as single. Recent messages with other people. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Alex got escorted out of the building that day, fired on the spot for creating a hostile work environment and misusing company resources, though I suspect it was more about the spectacle we'd caused and the office gossip that was going to follow. Their carefully constructed life collapsed in real time. Jordan and I had already coordinated our next moves. I'd packed up Alex's stuff from our apartment and left it with the building manager, changed the locks, had my name taken off any shared accounts. Jordan had done the same from their end, blocking Alex's number, cutting off all contact. Alex tried to reach out to both of us over the following weeks. Long, apologetic messages claiming they had a problem, that they were seeking help, that they never meant to hurt anyone. But here's the thing about people who maintain double lives for over a year. They meant to. Every choice, every lie, every carefully scheduled overlap was intentional. They knew exactly what they were doing. Jordan and I aren't friends exactly. The foundation of our connection is too weird and painful for that. But we text occasionally, check in, make sure the other is doing okay. We united in destroying someone who destroyed us both, and there's something powerful in that shared experience. I think about all the time I wasted with Alex. 3 years of building a life with someone who was simultaneously building a different life with someone else. The trips we took, the plans we made, the moments I thought were special. Were any of them real, or was I just another performance in Alex's carefully scripted show? Therapy has helped, so has time, so has knowing that I'm not crazy, that my instincts about something being off were right even when I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. Jordan said the same thing. They'd felt something was wrong but couldn't articulate it, had rationalized away the red flags because they wanted to believe in what they had. Alex lost both of us, their job, their apartment, and their reputation. Mutual friends found out what happened. Word spread. The consequences were real and lasting. And honestly, I don't feel bad about it. Not even a little bit. You don't get to build a double life on the backs of people who trusted you and then act surprised when it all comes crashing down. Double lives are built on deception, But sometimes the deception runs even deeper, especially when gaslighting is involved, like in the next story. My partner Sam swore I was paranoid. Every time I brought up the late night texts or the sudden work trips, or the smell of unfamiliar cologne clinging to their clothes, the answer was always the same. I was imagining things. I was too insecure. I needed therapy. And maybe I started to believe it. That's the thing about gaslighting. When someone you love tells you repeatedly that your reality isn't real, you start to doubt yourself. Even when every instinct is screaming that something's wrong, you begin to think maybe the problem is you. The texts would come at midnight, 1 in the morning, 2. Sam would angle the phone away, type quickly, then put it face down on the nightstand. When I asked who it was, the answer was always work. A colleague in a different time zone, an urgent project, nothing to worry about. The work trip started 6 months into our relationship. Weekend conferences, client meetings that required overnight stays. Sam worked in consulting, so it seemed plausible. But the frequency increased. 1 trip a month became 2, then 3. I'd ask for details about where they were staying, what the conference was about. Sam would get defensive, accuse me of not trusting them, turn it around until I was the one apologizing. Our friends started to notice the tension between us, but Sam got to them first, shaped the narrative before I could, told them I was controlling, that I checked their phone, that I got upset when they had to travel for work, made me sound unreasonable and clingy. I'd show up to group hangouts and feel the judgment radiating off people who used to be my friends too. Sam was good at this, really good. They'd done it so gradually that I didn't notice the isolation happening. Suddenly, I was the problem friend, the unstable partner, the one everyone had to walk on eggshells around. When I tried to defend myself, to explain that I wasn't being paranoid, that there were real reasons for my concerns, people would exchange looks. The kind of looks that said they'd already discussed this without me. I started to pull back, stopped bringing up the late nights and the mysterious trips, stopped asking questions, because every question was evidence of my jealousy, my insecurity, my need for therapy. But I wasn't crazy, and I knew I wasn't crazy, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through Sam's laptop while they were in the shower. My hands were shaking as I opened their email, expecting to find nothing, expecting to prove myself wrong and feel relief even through the guilt of snooping. Instead, I found everything. Emails with someone named Morgan going back 8 months. Not just casual conversation. Love letters, detailed plans about their future together. Messages about how hard it was to keep sneaking around, how much Morgan missed them, how they couldn't wait until Sam finally left me. That last part was specific. There was a whole email thread about timing. Sam had told Morgan they couldn't leave me yet because we'd just renewed our lease, that they needed to wait until it ended to avoid the financial complication of breaking it. 6 more months, and then they'd be free to start their real life together. I was a logistical inconvenience, a lease obligation, something to be endured until the paperwork allowed for a cleaner exit. The cruelty of it was stunning. Sam had been actively planning to leave while simultaneously convincing me and everyone we knew that I was unstable for suspecting anything was wrong. Every time I'd voiced a concern, every time my gut told me something was off, I'd been right, and Sam had weaponized my sanity against me. I printed everything. Every email, every love letter, every text message thread I could access. There were dozens of them going back months. I organized them chronologically in a folder, made copies, stored them carefully. Then I waited. Our friend group had a monthly dinner party, rotating houses. Next month it was at our place. Sam and I were hosting. I confirmed with everyone that they were coming, made sure Morgan was on the guest list too. Sam had introduced Morgan months ago as a work friend. I'd met them twice. They'd seemed nice, friendly, normal. They had no idea I existed as anything other than Sam's roommate. Sam had told them we were just friends sharing an apartment to save money, that we'd dated briefly years ago, but it hadn't worked out. Morgan thought they were dating someone who was single and available, just taking things slow because of a complicated living situation. The night of the dinner party, I cooked an elaborate meal, set the table beautifully, played the perfect host. Sam kept giving me confused looks, probably wondering why I was in such a good mood, why I wasn't starting any fights or acting jealous. After dinner, while everyone was having drinks and dessert, I brought out packets, nicely printed, bound with paper clips, one for each person at the table. I handed them out like party favors, smiling the whole time. The first page was an email from Sam to Morgan talking about how tedious I was, how they couldn't wait to be done with this living situation. The second page was a text exchange about a weekend trip they'd taken while Sam had told me they were at a work conference. The rest was more of the same: lies, manipulation, a whole secret relationship documented in excruciating detail. The room went completely silent. People started flipping through pages, reading, trying to process what they were seeing. Sam's face went from confused to pale to panicked in about 10 seconds. But that wasn't even the worst part. Morgan was sitting right there at the table, reading their own packet, seeing all the messages they'd sent to Sam, interspersed with messages Sam had sent to other people calling Morgan dramatic and clingy, because apparently Sam had been playing Morgan too, complaining about them to other friends, keeping options open even within the affair. Sam tried to laugh it off, made a joke about me being dramatic, suggested this was some kind of mental breakdown they'd been worried about, looked around the table for support, for someone to back them up, to agree that I was being unreasonable. No one joined in. Morgan stood up first, asked Sam directly if I was actually their partner, if we were actually together this whole time. Sam tried to deflect, to spin it somehow, but the evidence was literally in Morgan's hands, every lie documented and dated. Morgan left, just grabbed their coat and walked out, without another word. Then our friends started leaving too. Quiet, uncomfortable goodbyes. A few people hugged me on their way out. Someone told me they were sorry, that they should have listened when I tried to tell them something was wrong. Most just left silently, not sure what to say. Sam tried to explain after everyone was gone, said it was complicated, that they never meant for it to go this far, that they were planning to tell me eventually. I cut them off, told them they had until the end of the week to move out. I'd already talked to the landlord, gotten my name taken off the lease, arranged to move in with a family member temporarily. The thing about being gaslit is that you start to question your own perception of reality. You know something's wrong, but everyone around you is telling you you're overreacting. You're too sensitive. You're the problem. It makes you feel insane. Getting my sanity back felt better than any revenge could have. Knowing I was right, that my instincts were correct, that I wasn't crazy or controlling or any of the things Sam had convinced people I was. The vindication of that was worth more than any apology Sam could have offered. Sam lost everyone that night. Morgan blocked them immediately. Our friend group cut them off. Word spread about what happened. Turns out when you spend months painting someone as unstable and then get exposed as a liar and a cheat, people don't forget that easily. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Sam tried to spin it afterward, claim I'd manipulated the evidence somehow, that things were taken out of context. But no one was buying it anymore. The credibility was gone. I still think about those months of being made to feel crazy, how close I came to actually believing it, how isolated I felt when everyone seemed to agree that I was the problem. Trust your gut. When something feels wrong, it usually is, and people who try to convince you that your reality isn't real are showing you exactly who they are. Believe them. Gaslighting is psychological warfare, but sometimes betrayal comes in the form of outright fraud, like when someone builds their entire relationship on lies, which is what happened next. My fiancé Tom proposed at a beautiful lakeside dinner on a warm evening in June. The sun was setting, casting everything in golden light. There were candles on the table, rose petals scattered around, a violinist playing softly in the background. When he got down on one knee and opened the ring box, I genuinely thought it was the most romantic moment of my life. The ring was stunning. He'd clearly put thought into it, choosing a design that matched my taste perfectly. His speech was heartfelt, talking about our future together, about building a life, about how I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. I said yes without hesitation. We kissed while the other diners applauded. It was perfect, except Tom had lied about everything. His job, his education, his family, his entire past. All of it was built on lies so elaborate and layered that I'd never thought to question any of it. Why would I? People don't usually assume their partner has fabricated their entire identity. Tom claimed to be a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm downtown. He left for work every morning in a suit, came home with stories about difficult clients and tedious meetings. He talked about his MBA from Harvard, about the connections he'd made there, about professors who'd mentored him. He said his parents had died in a car accident when he was in college, that he was an only child with no extended family. I'd felt terrible for him, admired how he'd built a successful life despite that tragedy. None of it was true. I found out because my sister insisted I run a background check before the wedding. She'd had a bad feeling about Tom, though she couldn't articulate why. Said something seemed off. I'd been annoyed at her for suggesting it, thought she was being paranoid and overprotective, but she was so insistent that I finally agreed just to prove her wrong. The background check company called me 3 days later. The investigator's voice was careful, professional, like he'd delivered bad news before and knew how to soften the blow. He asked if I was sitting down. Tom wasn't a financial analyst. He was a temp worker who'd been fired from 3 different companies over the past 5 years. The reason? Embezzlement. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. He'd been caught every time, but the companies had chosen not to press charges in exchange for him leaving quietly and paying back what he'd stolen. His Harvard MBA? Completely fabricated. He'd attended community college for 1 semester and dropped out. The diploma hanging in his home office was photoshopped. The investigator had checked with Harvard directly. No record of Tom ever attending. His deceased parents? Alive and living 2 states away. Estranged from Tom because he'd stolen money from them repeatedly over the years. Drained his mother's savings account, forged his father's signature on loan documents, pawned family heirlooms. They'd finally cut him off completely and told him never to contact them again. The investigator kept talking, listing more lies, more fabrications, every piece of Tom's identity that I thought I knew was false. I sat there in my apartment, the engagement ring heavy on my finger, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I didn't confront him immediately. I was too stunned, too hurt, too angry. I needed time to process, to verify, to decide what to do. Over the next week, I confirmed everything independently, called the companies where he'd supposedly worked and gotten vague responses about not being able to confirm employment details, which told me everything I needed to know. Reached out to Harvard's alumni office, found his parents' contact information through public records, and called them, listening as his mother tearfully confirmed everything the investigator had told me. Tom had no idea I knew. He came home every day, kissed me hello, talked about his fake job, made plans for our fake future. The performance was flawless. He'd been lying to me for 2 years without ever slipping up. But that wasn't even the worst part. Tom had already started planning our engagement party. He'd booked a venue, sent out invitations to friends and family, arranged for catering. He was so excited about it, talking constantly about this big celebration where everyone we loved would gather to toast our future together. I let him plan it. Didn't say a word about what I'd discovered, just smiled and nodded and let him believe everything was fine. The engagement party was scheduled for a Saturday evening at an upscale restaurant with a private event room. Tom had invited everyone, his co-workers from the temp agency who he'd told were college friends, people from his gym who he'd spun elaborate stories to, distant acquaintances who only knew the version of himself he'd constructed. I'd invited people too, my family, my real friends, people who actually cared about me, and I'd prepared something special for the occasion. The party started normally. People mingled, drinks flowed, appetizers circulated. Tom was in his element, playing the role of successful fiancé, telling stories about how we met, about our relationship, about his bright future. He was charming and confident and completely convincing. Then came time for toasts. Tom stood up first, glass raised, ready to give what I'm sure would have been a beautiful speech about love and commitment and partnership. I interrupted him, said I had a surprise I wanted to share first, asked the venue staff to pull up the video I'd prepared on the large screen at the front of the room. The video started with a simple title card, The Truth About Tom. Then came the interviews, his former employers carefully recorded with their permission, describing exactly why Tom had been fired. HR representatives reading from official termination documents, details about the embezzlement, the lies he'd told, the money he'd stolen. Next, his parents, his very much alive parents. His mother crying as she explained how Tom had drained her savings. His father showing documentation of the forged loans, the stolen heirlooms, the pattern of theft and deception that had led them to cut off their own son. Then came the Harvard Registrar's office, confirming no record of Tom's attendance, screenshots of the photoshopped diploma next to a real one, highlighting the differences. The room had gone completely silent. Tom's face drained of all color. He tried to speak, to explain, but nothing came out. Guests were staring at the screen, then at him, then back at the screen. The horror and confusion on their faces was palpable. I let the video play through to the end, every lie documented with receipts, dates, evidence. 15 minutes of Tom's carefully constructed identity being systematically dismantled. When it finished, I stood up, took off the engagement ring, and set it on the table in front of him. Told the room that I would not be marrying a man who'd lied about literally every aspect of his life, that I deserved better than someone who saw deception as a lifestyle. Then I walked out, didn't wait for his response, didn't listen to his attempts at explanation, just left. My sister was waiting outside. She'd known what I was planning, had helped me prepare the video. We went to her place and I finally let myself fall apart, cried about the relationship I'd thought I had, about the future I'd been planning, about the violation of having someone lie to me so completely for so long. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Tom tried to salvage his reputation, sent messages to everyone who'd been at the party claiming the video was fake, that I was unstable, that this was all some kind of misunderstanding or revenge plot. He said his parents were lying because of a family dispute, that his former employers were covering up their own mistakes, that Harvard's records were wrong. But I'd been thorough. I'd given copies of all the documentation to several people at the party. His temp agency found out about his lies and let him go. People he'd befriended based on his fabricated identity wanted nothing to do with him. His entire social network, built on deception, collapsed. He tried to contact me repeatedly, emails, calls, showing up at my apartment. I got a restraining order. He violated it twice and got arrested. The judge wasn't sympathetic to someone with his documented history of lying and theft. Last I heard, Tom moved to a different city, started over somewhere else, probably with a new set of lies and a new identity. Maybe he learned something from getting exposed so publicly. Probably not. I think about how close I came to marrying him sometimes, to legally binding myself to someone who'd built our entire relationship on fiction. If my sister hadn't insisted on that background check, I might have gone through with it. Might have spent years or even decades with someone who saw me as just another person to deceive. The engagement party video went semi-viral in our social circles. People shared it as a cautionary tale about really knowing someone before committing to them. I've had strangers message me asking how I stayed so composed, how I managed to plan such a perfect takedown. The truth is, I wasn't composed. I was furious and heartbroken and betrayed. But I channeled all of that into making sure Tom faced consequences for his actions, that he couldn't just lie his way into another relationship, another job, another life built on deception. Some people lie about credentials and pasts, while others weaponize lies to ruin reputations entirely, which brings us to the next story. After we broke up, my ex Casey started spreading vicious rumors about me. Not subtle hints or vague complaints, actual detailed lies designed to destroy my reputation. They told people I'd cheated multiple times throughout our relationship, that I'd stolen money from them, that I'd faked a pregnancy to trap them into staying with me. None of it was true, not a single word. But the thing about lies is they don't need to be true to be effective. They just need to be repeated enough times by someone people trust. And people trusted Casey. They were charming, well-liked, the kind of person who seemed incapable of dishonesty. So when Casey started telling these stories, people believed them. Friends I'd known for years suddenly stopped returning my calls. Mutual acquaintances would see me at parties and literally turn around and walk the other way. My social circle evaporated almost overnight. I tried defending myself at first, told people the truth, that Casey was lying, that none of these things had happened. But defending yourself against rumors just makes you look defensive, guilty, like you're trying too hard to cover something up. The more I denied it, the more people seemed to believe I was hiding something. My reputation crumbled. People I'd considered close friends believed the worst about me without even asking for my side of the story. It was isolating and humiliating, and I had no idea how to fight back against someone who was just making things up. Then I got a message from someone named Taylor. We'd never met, but they knew Casey. The message was short and direct. Casey did this to me too. We met for coffee the next day. Taylor had dated Casey 2 years before me. When that relationship ended, Casey had launched a similar campaign, told everyone Taylor had been abusive, controlling, had destroyed Casey's mental health. None of it was true, but Taylor's entire friend group had turned against them. They'd had to move to a different part of the city to escape the social fallout. Taylor had thought they were alone in this, that maybe they really had done something wrong, that Casey's reaction was somehow justified, even though they couldn't figure out what they'd done to deserve it. Finding out Casey had done the exact same thing to me was validating and horrifying at the same time. We started digging. If Casey had done this to both of us, there might be others. There were. Taylor connected me with someone named Morgan. Morgan introduced us to Jamie. Jamie knew about 2 more people, Chris and Alex. All of them had dated Casey at different points over the past 5 years. All of them had the same story. The relationship would end, sometimes because Casey got bored, sometimes because the other person finally saw through the manipulation. And then Casey would systematically destroy their reputation with elaborate lies. The patterns were identical. Accusations of cheating, claims of financial abuse. Sometimes Casey said they'd been physically hurt, though the details were always vague enough to be unprovable. The lies were tailored to each person, but the structure was always the same. Preemptive character assassination to control the narrative before the ex could tell their side. But that wasn't even the worst part. We created a group chat, all 6 of us. Started comparing timelines and realized some of Casey's relationships had overlapped. Casey had been dating multiple people simultaneously, keeping us all separate, feeding each of us different stories about their life. When those relationships inevitably collapsed, the rumor campaigns served a dual purpose. They destroyed the ex's credibility while also explaining away any inconsistencies in Casey's own story. It was manipulation on a scale I hadn't fully grasped when it was just happening to me. This wasn't someone lashing out after a bad breakup. This was a deliberate pattern of behavior spanning years. Casey was systematically using and discarding people, then burning their reputations on the way out to protect themselves from consequences. We decided to expose it, all of us together. Safety in numbers, consistent stories, undeniable evidence. Jamie, who worked in tech, created a shared document. We each wrote out our experiences with dates, screenshots of messages, receipts, any evidence we'd kept. The overlapping timelines alone were damning. Morgan had dated Casey from March to August of 2022. I'd started dating Casey in June of 2022. We'd overlapped for 3 months without either of us knowing the other existed. The document was detailed, organized, and devastating. 6 different people, 6 different time periods, the exact same pattern of behavior. We included screenshots of Casey's rumors about each of us, showing how the lies followed the same template. We even found instances where Casey had copy-pasted the same accusations, just changing the name. Then we sent it everywhere. Mutual friends, Casey's workplace, their family, anyone who'd been part of spreading the rumors about any of us. We didn't editorialize or add commentary, just presented the evidence and let people draw their own conclusions. The reaction was immediate and intense. Casey tried to deny it at first, claimed we were all conspiring against them, that this was some kind of coordinated revenge plot by bitter exes. But 6 consistent stories with receipts, timelines, and evidence. That's not a conspiracy. That's a pattern. People who believed Casey's lies about me started reaching out to apologize, said they should have asked for my side, that they felt terrible for cutting me off. Some of them were genuine. Others felt performative, like they were apologizing more to absolve their own guilt than because they actually cared about the harm they'd caused. I accepted the apologies, but I didn't forget who'd been quick to believe the worst about me without question. Those relationships were damaged in ways that couldn't be fully repaired. Trust, once broken like that, doesn't just snap back into place because someone says, sorry. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Casey lost their job. Their employer saw the document, saw the evidence of Casey lying and manipulating multiple people over years, and decided that wasn't someone they wanted representing their company. Casey tried to claim it was their personal life and shouldn't affect their employment, But when your personal life involves that level of systematic deception, employers tend to take notice. Their family cut contact. Casey's mum actually reached out to Taylor to apologize, said she'd believed Casey's version of events and felt horrible for not questioning it, said she was ashamed of her child's behavior and needed time to process everything. Casey's friend group fractured. Some people still defended them, claimed we were exaggerating or that everyone makes mistakes. But most people saw the evidence for what it was, a clear pattern of predatory behavior disguised as bad breakups. Within 2 months, Casey had moved to a different city. Fresh start, I guess. Though I wonder how long it will take before they start the pattern again with new people who don't know their history. The 6 of us stay in touch. We have a group chat where we check in, share updates, sometimes just vent about the lasting effects of what Casey put us through. There's something powerful about having people who understand exactly what you went through because they lived it too. Taylor's doing better now. So is Morgan. Jamie's in therapy working through trust issues. Chris and Alex are both in new relationships and learning how to be vulnerable again after Casey taught them that vulnerability gets weaponized. I think about Casey sometimes, whether they feel any remorse for what they did to all of us, whether they've convinced themselves they were the victim in all these situations. Narcissists are good at that, rewriting history until they believe their own lies. But mostly I think about how close I came to just accepting what happened to me, to believing that sometimes reputations get destroyed and there's nothing you can do about it. If Taylor hadn't reached out, I might never have known there were others, might have spent years thinking I was the only one, that maybe I really had done something to deserve Casey's campaign against me. Finding the others saved me from that, showed me that the pattern wasn't about me at all. It was about Casey's need to control the narrative, to never be the bad guy in their own story, no matter how much damage they caused. Justice felt good, not in a vindictive way, but in a restorative one. My reputation recovered. People knew the truth. Casey faced real consequences for their actions, and 6 people who'd been isolated and gaslit and made to feel crazy got to stand together and say this happened, it was real, and it wasn't our fault. Reputations can be destroyed with lies, but they can also be weaponized through betrayal, especially when someone uses your deepest secrets against you, like in this next story. I confided in my best friend Riley about my past, the real stuff, the things I didn't talk about with anyone else because they were too raw, too personal, too complicated to explain to people who didn't really know me. We'd been friends since high school, the kind of friendship where you assume it's permanent, where you trust without question. I told her about my mental health struggles in college, the semester I'd failed because I couldn't get out of bed, the therapy, the medication adjustments, the slow climb back to functioning. I told her about my family trauma, about why I didn't talk to my dad anymore, about the things that happened when I was younger that I was still processing. I told her about mistakes I regretted, relationships I'd handled poorly, times I'd hurt people without meaning to. She listened. She told me my secrets were safe. She promised that what I shared stayed between us, and I believed her because that's what best friends do. They hold your worst moments and love you anyway. Then we had a falling out over something completely petty. I can't even remember what started it. Something about me cancelling plans last minute, or not responding to a text fast enough. The kind of small friction that happens in any friendship and usually resolves itself in a few days. Except Riley decided to go nuclear. She told everyone, and I mean everyone, our mutual friends, people from our college friend group, even acquaintances who barely knew me. But she didn't just share what I'd told her. She twisted it, reframed my confessions into a narrative where I was unstable, dangerous, someone to be avoided. My mental health struggles became proof that I was erratic and unreliable. My family trauma became evidence that I had anger issues. My past relationship mistakes became a pattern of manipulation. She took the most vulnerable parts of me and weaponized them into gossip. Her friend group shunned me completely. People I'd known for years stopped responding to messages. Plans I'd been included in suddenly didn't have room for me anymore. I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop. I could feel them looking at me differently, like I was something fragile and broken and potentially explosive. The isolation was devastating. I'd trusted Riley with pieces of myself I didn't show anyone else, and she'd used them to destroy my social life. Every time I tried to defend myself, It came across as exactly what she'd told people: unstable, defensive, proof that her version was true. I spent weeks feeling helpless, questioning whether I'd done something to deserve this, wondering if maybe Riley was right, if maybe I was the problem. That's what this kind of betrayal does. It makes you doubt your own reality. But then I remembered something. Riley had confided in me too. She'd told me about the charity fundraiser she'd organized sophomore year, how she'd collected money for a local animal shelter, posted about it constantly on social media, got praised for her generosity, how she'd pocketed most of the money and only donated a fraction. She'd laughed about it, said the shelter got something and she got to pay off her credit card, so everyone won. She'd told me about regularly taking money from her parents without asking, not borrowing, taking, going through their wallets, transferring small amounts from their accounts, always just under the threshold where they'd notice. She called it her parents' tax for being wealthy and out of touch. She told me about how she manipulated her partners, the lies she told to make them jealous, the ways she'd intentionally create drama to test their devotion, the emotional games she played because she was bored or insecure or just wanted to see if she could. And unlike my confessions, which were about struggling and making mistakes and trying to be better, Riley's were about active choices to hurt and deceive people. She wasn't confessing guilt. She was bragging. I'd kept her secrets because that's what you do for friends. But Riley had shown me we weren't friends anymore. She'd burned that bridge herself, so I made a burner account and posted everything, with proof. I had screenshots of her messages bragging about the fundraiser money. I had records of the actual donation amount versus what she'd publicly claimed to raise. I had photos she'd sent me of expensive purchases from that same time period, things she couldn't have afforded on her part-time barista salary. I had screenshots of conversations where she detailed exactly how she manipulated her current boyfriend. The fake emergencies, the manufactured jealousy, the emotional leverage she used to keep him anxious and eager to please. I posted it all to a forum her friend group frequented, laid it out chronologically, let the evidence speak for itself, didn't editorialize, didn't add emotional commentary, just facts and screenshots. And here's where it gets absurd. Her friends saw who she really was within hours. The comment section filled up with people connecting dots, sharing their own experiences with Riley that suddenly made sense. Her boyfriend at the time commented asking if the screenshots were real. Someone who'd donated to her fake charity asked where the money had actually gone. The friend group that had shunned me based on Riley's twisted version of my confessions turned on her immediately. They dropped her faster than they'd dropped me. Group chats she'd been in went silent for her. Plans got made without her. The same social death she'd engineered for me came for her instead. Riley tried blaming me, posted long emotional messages about betrayal and privacy, and how sharing her personal business was a horrible thing to do. The irony was apparently lost on her. People pointed it out in the comments. You did the exact same thing to her. You don't get to cry about betrayal when you betrayed her first. The difference was my confessions had been about struggles and healing. Hers were about actively hurting people. My vulnerabilities were things I was working through in therapy. Her secrets were crimes and manipulation she was proud of. Her boyfriend broke up with her. Her parents found out about the money she'd taken. The people who'd donated to her charity fundraiser started asking questions about getting refunds or receipts. Everything unraveled. Then came the breaking point. Riley showed up at my apartment 3 weeks later. She was crying, looked like she hadn't slept in days, begging me to take down the posts. Said her life was falling apart, that she'd lost everything, that I didn't understand how badly I'd hurt her. I asked if she remembered showing up at my lowest point and spreading my trauma around like entertainment. If she remembered how she'd isolated me from everyone we knew. If she'd felt any empathy when I was the one crying and alone. She tried to claim it was different, that what she'd shared about me was just concern for my well-being, that she'd been trying to protect people from my instability. The gaslighting was almost impressive in its audacity. I told her the post stayed up, that her victims deserved to know who they were dealing with, that consequences were finally catching up to choices she'd made long before I'd exposed them. She left screaming that I was vindictive, that I'd destroyed her life over a small argument. Small argument. She'd taken my deepest vulnerabilities and turned them into weapons, but somehow I was the vindictive one for returning the favor. I didn't just lose a friend, I made sure she lost everything she'd tried to take from me. her reputation, her friend group, her ability to play victim while hurting people. Do I feel bad about it? Not even slightly. Riley taught me that some people don't deserve the grace of your silence, that protecting someone's secrets when they've weaponized yours isn't loyalty, it's enabling. The friend group eventually reached out to apologize, said they should have heard my side before believing Riley's version. Some of those friendships recovered, others didn't. But I rebuilt my social life with people who'd actually proven themselves trustworthy. Riley moved across the country 6 months later. Fresh start, new people who didn't know her history. I hope she learned something from it, but I doubt it. People like that rarely do. Betrayal among friends is painful, but workplace sabotage, that's a whole different level of vindictive, as the next person discovered. I spent weeks preparing a presentation for a major client. This wasn't some routine pitch. This was the kind of account that could define careers, the kind that gets mentioned in company newsletters and earns you a spot in the next round of promotions. I worked late every night, double-checked every data point, rehearsed my delivery until I could do it in my sleep. My coworker Jen offered to help with the slides, said she had experience with this particular client's industry, knew what kind of visuals they responded to. It seemed generous. We weren't exactly friends, but we'd always been cordial. I figured having a second set of eyes couldn't hurt. Big mistake. The day of the pitch, I opened the presentation file 15 minutes before the client arrived. Half my data was wrong. Numbers that I'd verified multiple times were suddenly off by significant margins. Slides were missing entirely, leaving gaps in the narrative flow. Charts were mislabeled, making claims that contradicted the points I was trying to make. I tried to fix what I could in those 15 minutes, frantically editing slides while my hands shook, but there wasn't enough time. The client walked in and I had to present a broken, incoherent mess that made me look like I hadn't prepared at all. They were polite about it, asked a few clarifying questions that I couldn't answer because the data supporting my answers had been deleted from the deck, exchanged glances with each other that I recognized as the professional equivalent of yikes. The meeting ended 20 minutes early. They said they'd be in touch. I knew what that meant. The client walked, took their business to a competitor. My boss called me into his office that afternoon and tore into me about professionalism and preparation and how I'd embarrassed the entire company. I tried to explain what had happened, that the file had been corrupted or tampered with, but I sounded defensive and paranoid. He wasn't interested in excuses. Jen played innocent perfectly. She stopped by my desk later that day with coffee and sympathy, said she couldn't believe the presentation had gone so badly, offered comfort like a concerned colleague. The performance was flawless. I knew she'd sabotaged me, but I couldn't prove it. The file history showed edits from my computer, my login credentials. She'd covered her tracks completely. I spent the next few weeks in professional purgatory. My boss treated me like damaged goods. Projects I would have been assigned went to other people. I got excluded from meetings. The career momentum I'd been building evaporated overnight. But I noticed something else during those weeks. Jen's lifestyle had gotten noticeably more expensive. Designer bags that cost more than our monthly salary. Luxury weekend trips she'd post about on social media. A new car that was way out of range for someone at our level. At first I figured family money or a wealthy partner, but Jen had mentioned in the past that she was paying off student loans and that her parents weren't well off. The math didn't add up. I started paying attention, watching her patterns. She'd take long lunch breaks and come back looking stressed. She'd make personal calls in the parking lot, speaking in low tones that suggested she didn't want to be overheard. She was protective of her laptop, always angling the screen away, closing windows quickly when people walked by. Then I got lucky. Jen left her laptop unlocked when she went to the bathroom. Just for a minute, but a minute was enough. I walked past her desk and saw an email open on her screen. It was from a burner address, discussing payment for sales pipeline data from our CRM system. She was selling company information to competitors, and here's where it gets absurd. I started documenting everything. Took photos of her screen when she left it open. Noticed patterns in when competitors would suddenly know about our clients or our pricing strategies. Cross-referenced the timing with Jen's expensive purchases. Built a timeline that was damning and obvious once you saw it laid out. I found her burner email address through a carelessly worded message she'd sent to herself. Traced transaction records through screenshots she'd saved in her cloud storage that synced to her work computer. She'd been doing this for at least 8 months, making thousands of dollars selling proprietary information. The irony of her sabotaging my presentation became clear. I'd been working on landing that exact client. If I succeeded, it would have meant a huge account that competitors would have paid well to know about. By making me fail, she was protecting her revenue stream. She couldn't sell information about accounts we didn't have. I compiled everything into a detailed report. Screenshots, transaction records, email chains, a timeline of suspicious competitor knowledge that aligned with Jen's data access. Made it airtight and undeniable. Then I sent it anonymously to the CEO and the compliance team. The investigation moved fast. Once they started looking, the evidence was overwhelming. Jen had been sloppy in ways she hadn't realized. The burner email was linked to her personal recovery phone number. The transactions went to an account in her name. Her access logs showed she'd been pulling data she had no business reason to view. They fired her within a week, walked her out of the building with security, the whole humiliating corporate perp walk. But it didn't stop there. The company pressed charges: corporate espionage, breach of contract, theft of trade secrets. Jen faced serious legal consequences, the kind that don't just cost you a job, but can result in criminal prosecution. What happened next caught me off guard. My boss called me into his office. I thought I was getting fired too, guilty by association, or maybe for the anonymous tip they'd somehow traced to me. Instead, he apologized, said the investigation had revealed what Jen had done to my presentation, that IT had found deleted backup files showing the original correct version before her sabotage. He admitted he'd been too harsh, hadn't given me the benefit of the doubt, had let office politics cloud his judgment. I got assigned the next major client pitch. Different prospect, but similar scale. My boss personally reviewed my materials, offered resources, made sure I had everything I needed. It felt like overcompensation for how he'd treated me before, but I wasn't complaining. The pitch went perfectly. The data was accurate because I controlled every aspect of it. The slides flowed logically. The client signed within 2 weeks. I got the promotion that had seemed impossible a month earlier. Jen's legal situation got worse over time. The competitors she'd sold information to got subpoenaed. Some of them flipped on her to protect themselves, providing evidence of the transactions. She ended up with a criminal record and massive legal bills. Her career in the industry was over. Nobody was hiring someone convicted of corporate espionage. People asked me if I felt bad about it, if maybe I should have just let it go, found another job, moved on with my life. But here's the thing, Jen didn't just sabotage my presentation. She committed actual crimes, sold out her employer, her colleagues, the people who trusted her with access to sensitive information. She did it for designer bags and vacation photos. The narcissism of it was staggering. I think about that moment when she brought me coffee after the failed pitch, the fake sympathy, the performance of being a supportive coworker while knowing exactly what she'd done. That level of calculated cruelty deserved consequences. Karma doesn't always work on its own. Sometimes it needs evidence, documentation, and an anonymous tip to the compliance department. Sometimes you have to be the push that gets the boulder rolling. My career recovered and then some. Jen's imploded in a very public, very permanent way. I sleep fine at night knowing I didn't create her problems. I just made sure they didn't stay hidden. Corporate sabotage is cutthroat, but sometimes the rot goes all the way to the top, like when HR itself becomes complicit, which is exactly what happened in the next situation. I reported sexual harassment by a senior manager on a Tuesday afternoon in September, filled out the official complaint form, met with HR for over an hour, recounted every uncomfortable comment, every inappropriate touch, every time he'd cornered me in the supply room or sent me late-night messages that had nothing to do with work. The HR representative nodded sympathetically, took detailed notes, assured me they took these matters very seriously, said they'd launch a full investigation immediately and I'd hear back within a week. Weeks passed, nothing. I sent a follow-up email asking about the status of the investigation, got a vague response about these things taking time, that they were being thorough. Another week went by. The manager in question was still showing up to work every day, still attending meetings I was in, still acting like nothing had happened. He'd even smiled at me in the hallway, this knowing smirk that made my skin crawl. Finally, after a month of silence, HR called me in for a meeting. They'd investigated my complaint thoroughly, they said, interviewed relevant parties, reviewed available evidence. Their conclusion? insufficient evidence to support my claims. The incident I described was a misunderstanding. The manager categorically denied everything. Without additional corroboration, they couldn't take action. I asked if they'd questioned the manager. They said they had, but wouldn't provide details about that conversation. I asked if they'd reviewed his message history or interviewed other women on our team. They said their investigation was comprehensive and the matter was now closed. The manager wasn't even disciplined. No written warning, no mandatory training, nothing. It was like I'd never said anything at all. I felt completely betrayed, silenced, like I'd put myself in a vulnerable position, trusted the system that was supposed to protect employees, and been dismissed entirely. The worst part was having to continue working there, seeing him every day, knowing he'd gotten away with it. I started looking for a new job immediately, updated my resume, reached out to contacts, applied to positions at other companies, but something about just walking away felt wrong, like I was letting them win, letting them continue doing this to other people. That's when I started talking to other women in the office. Casual conversations at first, feeling out whether anyone else had experienced similar issues, and that's when I found out I wasn't the first. Sarah from accounting had filed a complaint 2 years ago against a different manager who'd made explicit comments about her body and propositioned her at a company happy hour. Her complaint was also investigated and dismissed for insufficient evidence. The manager still worked there, 2 floors up. Jennifer from marketing had reported her supervisor for repeatedly asking her out, despite being told no, for showing up at her apartment uninvited, for texting her at all hours. HR told her it sounded like a personal matter, not a workplace issue. He got promoted 6 months later. 3 other women had similar stories, different managers, same pattern. Complaints filed, investigations that went nowhere, women who ended up leaving the company while the men stayed and prospered. Here's where it gets absurd. I started digging through company resources, old employee directories, LinkedIn profiles of people who'd left. Found women who'd worked there previously and reached out to ask if they'd be willing to talk about their experiences. More than a dozen responded. More complaints, more buried investigations, more women who'd been gaslit into thinking they were overreacting or misunderstanding innocent behavior. HR wasn't protecting employees. They were protecting the company from liability. Every complaint that got officially substantiated was a potential lawsuit, a PR nightmare, a settlement payment. So they developed a system for making complaints disappear. Perfunctory investigations that asked the accused if they did it, accepted their denials at face value, and closed the case. No evidence was ever sufficient because they weren't looking for evidence. They were looking for plausible deniability. I gathered everything I could access. My own complaint and the response. Testimonies from other women, some still at the company and some who'd left. Patterns in HR's responses. The same language used across multiple dismissals. Email chains where managers joked about complaints, confident they'd be protected. Then I sent it all to a labor lawyer who specialized in workplace discrimination and harassment. Anonymized the victims who wanted to remain anonymous, but left in enough detail to show the systematic nature of the cover-ups. The lawyer looked at everything and told me this was one of the clearest cases of institutional failure she'd seen. She asked if I'd be willing to go public. I also sent everything to a journalist at a local news outlet who'd written about workplace harassment issues before. Gave her the timeline, the pattern, the evidence of HR actively burying legitimate complaints to protect the company's reputation. The story broke on a Wednesday morning. Front page of the business section, detailed investigation showing how our company had systematically dismissed harassment complaints over a 3-year period. Named names, included quotes from women who'd been brave enough to go on record. Showed the pattern of HR protecting abusers and silencing victims. By that afternoon, we had protesters outside the building. By the next morning, federal investigators had contacted the company about potential violations of workplace protection laws. By the end of the week, the board had announced a complete overhaul of HR policies and practices. Then came the breaking point. The entire HR department was placed on administrative leave while an outside firm conducted a comprehensive audit. 2 weeks later, the HR director and 3 HR managers were fired. The senior manager who'd harassed me was terminated immediately, along with 4 other managers who'd been named in various complaints. The company hired an entirely new HR team with explicit instructions to prioritize employee safety over liability management. Lawsuits started rolling in. Women who'd left the company years ago, who'd been silenced and dismissed, came forward with lawyers. The company faced massive financial and reputational damage. Stock price dropped. Major clients reconsidered their contracts. The CEO gave a public apology that everyone could tell was written by lawyers trying to minimize further damage. I left for a better job 2 months later. Got an offer from a competitor who'd seen the news coverage and reached out. Said they were impressed by my courage in speaking up. Better pay, better title, better work environment. But more importantly, a company that actually had functional reporting systems and a track record of taking complaints seriously. People ask if I regret how public it got, if I wish I'd handled it differently. The answer is no, not even a little bit. Those HR policies that protected harassers instead of victims needed to be exposed. The managers who thought they were untouchable needed to face consequences. The women who'd been silenced deserved to have their stories heard. The company is different now from what I hear. New leadership, new policies, actual accountability. Several of the women who'd filed complaints and been dismissed are back working there under the new regime. The culture shifted because it had to, because continuing the old way was no longer an option. Burning it all down felt extreme at the time. Scorched earth doesn't leave much standing, but sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. Sometimes the rot is so deep that you can't just trim the diseased branches. You have to tear out the roots and start over. I made sure no one else would be silenced the way I was. That was worth whatever professional capital it cost me. And honestly, it didn't cost much. Turns out standing up to institutional harassment and cover-ups looks pretty good on a resume. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're officially part of the Reddit Drama Survivors Club. These stories remind us that secrets, lies, and betrayal might be everywhere, but so is justice, sometimes served cold, sometimes served publicly, but always served eventually. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth always finds a way out, whether whispered or screamed. See you in the next one.